Welcome to the show for sinners and sufferers. My name is Cody, and I'm joined today by my friend Matthew.
Hey.
Matthew Parker. I'll give your full name. It makes you sound like a celebrity if I use your whole name.
Introducing Mr. Parker.
Yeah. Mr. Parker, yeah. You've been listening to the show for a bit. You've said you retroactively listened to the Pastors with Pour-Overs episodes, right?
It was still the Pastors and Pour-Overs days.
It was still those days?
Yeah, and okay. I'm thankful because to be on the show, I'm not a pastor and I don't know enough about coffee. But now it's sinners and sufferers. Now it's okay.
We're all sinners and sufferers, which is the point, by the way. I feel like people are often like, "Why do you call it that?" I'm like, "Because it's for everybody. It's for sinners and sufferers." But
if there's anyone it doesn't apply to, leave a comment and we'll tell you.
If you've neither ever suffered or sinned, leave a comment because it'd be nice to meet Jesus in the comments. I don't know. Yeah, it's good to have you on. We've talked a little bit. We're like new friends, acquaintances, but I feel like the fact that you've listened for so long and that when you said what kind of brought about this conversation is you said, yeah, I think I mostly agree with everything you guys say, and the things where I disagree would be tertiary. And I went, that's a good idea for a conversation. And then you said, yeah, you should talk about primary, secondary, tertiary. Like, what things do we have to agree on to be Christians, and what things are kind of just like not super important? What things can we let slide or like, yeah. Where do we split churches? Where do we call people heretics, and when do we just live with the disagreement is basically what these categories fall into. Ed, you didn't know about this because I was asking if you'd heard about the SBC controversy with Rick Warren of Saddleback Church, which is funny because one of the like biggest churches in North America, and the Southern Baptist Convention is the biggest Protestant denomination in the world. The only thing bigger than it is the Catholic Church. And apparently he's part of it. Who knew?
The SBC, not the Catholic Church.
Yeah, the SBC, because it's Saddleback churches like that. You think they're not in a denomination; they're just their own thing. But they had the Southern Baptist Convention, is what they call their denomination. They recently had their convention where they all gather, which is called the Southern Baptist Convention. So who knows? But at that, one of the big things that they brought forth to argue about, because that's what they do at their convention, they just all come argue about stuff, was Rick Warren has started ordaining women as pastors in his church, and the denomination historically, their stance in the documents that he would have signed to be part of the denomination says that they reserve the position of elder or pastor for men. So it's been part of their discussion is like, should we kick him out over this, or can we live with it? And his sort of argument that he brought forward was, it's not a big deal. Let's just agree to disagree. We have a shared mission. Let's get over it. And the denominational rep guys are basically taking this perspective of, well, you signed a document. Like we said we agree on these things, and that was kind of the basis of establishing this. And I just thought that was interesting, because a lot of the conversation online is like, well, why is it a big deal? Like, why does it matter if, one church ordains women as pastors and one church doesn't? Or like, can't you just all get along? Like, you all believe in the same Jesus. And I thought that kind of pertains to this discussion of why we should care, like why it's worth thinking about theology and doctrine in the first place, why it's important, and why it's something that might be worth dividing over and deciding like where we stand in what kind of church we want to be part of and stuff like that.
Yeah, big story, but that lines up perfectly with what we're talking about, because I feel like sometimes Christians get into this black and white thinking of either everything is this gospel issue, hill to die on, or it's all relative, it doesn't really matter, get along. But you can't have a unified denomination or organization and have no standards, right?
Yeah.
If you send out a missionary and he believes completely different things than you and starts a church, you can't really be partnered together.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
When you definitely have, I found like I've shared early days of the podcast about how I went through sort of like my progressive Christian phase where I was really into the really progressive emergent area, and there was a lot of believe whatever you want, like everything's subjective. But then every once in a while there'd be like someone would come out and be like, well, this, and you're like, wait, you believe that? Like, you actually think this thing is true? You think that's okay? And it's like, yeah, and well, you can't really say anything about it because our whole basis is that we have no standards, or like we don't really care all that much. But we do believe that this is important, which is why we're making an episode about it. And just like a couple points is like, why does this matter? I think one of the big reasons is that we really should treasure everything that God has to say. Like, if we love God, we love his word, we revere him, we should actually care about everything that he has to say. I think if you're married, if your wife wrote you a letter, or I think if I got a letter from like, some hero, like a musician I loved, or a pastor I look up to, or something, like, here's a letter, I'm not gonna go, oh wow, this part's really important to me, the rest of it I'm just gonna like forget about. I don't even care. Like, if I actually care about the person, I'm gonna care about what they have to say, and I'm gonna consider all of it. And I think if we really love God, we need to consider the entirety of his word. Like, even if we feel like, that's Old Testament, that's old law, doesn't apply to us, he still said it. And if we love him, should we not care about what he has to say?
Exactly. Like, when the Bible says in that all scriptures inspired and important, like, there's no more and less important portions of it.
Yeah.
So like when you're figuring out what we believe, you can't just ignore difficult parts. Like, you have to deal with it and come to terms with what it says. And like you talked about, why we care is because we love God. Like, we're part of his church, and the church isn't ours. It's not our association or community group, right? It's Christ's church. And so he kind of tells us how he expects us to do things. Mm-hmm. And so if we believe that, we got to honor that.
Yeah. Want to take the next point?
Yeah, sure. And so that's kind of the idea. Another reason we need to care is because that even though individual doctrines might not be absolutely essential in a gospel sense, they're still connected to each other, and they still can like relate to the gospel.
Yeah. All the minor, like, secondary or tertiary, which means like thirdly, doctrines all kind of hold each other up and help you have a cohesive view, so you don't have gaps in it. And the one example I could think of offhand, I don't know if you could think of a better one, was baptism. Like, is baptism only for confessing believers, or can you baptize the children of believers? That's ultimately a secondary issue. You're probably going to go to a certain church depending on where you land, but it's not making or breaking Christianity. We're still Christians no matter where we land on that. But if you choose to have no stance and you're like, oh, baptism's whatever, do what you want, then that opens the door for all kinds of really messed up, unhealthy views of baptism. Like, there's people out there that think that being baptized saves you, so as long as you just baptize your babies, now they're saved, which was kind of where the idea came from. Is I think it was one of the big plagues when, Roman Catholic Church sort of ruled the world. Almost said ruined the world, sorry. But
depending on your view, that might be how you think.
But yeah, when they kind of ruled the world, there was some big plague and babies were dying, and people were worried about if their babies were going to heaven. So they said, well, let's just baptize them. That saves them. That saves them. And that's just not the gospel at all. That's super counter gospel. It's not anything you do that saves you. But by not having a defined understanding of what baptism is, you can't say no to that. If you don't make your decision, whether it's, for infants to be part of this covenant community, or for believers to affirm their faith, or like, if you don't take a stance, then when someone says, oh, well, actually baptism is the thing that saves you, then you can't say no. So these minor doctrines do protect the larger ones and help you sort of have your cohesive view.
Exactly. And like you said, that's for example of a secondary issue where, like, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with John MacArthur and R.C. Sproul. One was a Presbyterian, one's a Baptist. They were great friends. We're still all Christians, but that's, you can't have the same church with conflicting views like that.
Yeah. Those are two guys who I always find, if I disagree with one of them, usually I agree with the other one on that point. Like, like if you read both of them, I'm like, if they were one person, that's where I'd agree with it. But secondary doctrines can also influence the way that we think and act as Christians. So even if it's not a salvation issue, they do have practical implications. So for one instance, if we believe in God's sovereignty, that is, that he is the absolute authority, that everything is working in accordance with his will, and that even when things are bad and seem to be straying from his will, that he still has it all moving in a general direction in line with what he wants, that gives us confidence, that influences the way that we pray, because you can pray, God save this person, which if you don't believe God's in control, you won't pray, God save this person. You'll pray, God coerce them somehow, or like, I don't know how you pray differently. Clearly, like I'm showing my hand where I've landed on this, but also with evangelism, because a lot of people, and we've talked about this, Kyle and I, you've probably listened, when people were like, well, if God's just in control of everything, why would you evangelize? It's like, well, because he tells us to, and we can be confident in our evangelism because we know that it's him that makes it work. That even if I completely fumble through my presentation, it's okay, because he's still working things the way he wants them to go, and he's gonna let the right words land and the wrong words disappear, you know?
Exactly. And like you said, the counter to if God's in control, why evangelize, is like, well, because God's in control, that's why we evangelize, because he's going to work through it. But exactly, like doctrines, you may just keep them in a box in our head of these are things you think, and they don't really matter, but they shape how your church functions. And so when we look at churches and see a lot of things we disagree with like how mega churches are acting or things people are doing, it's because of their understanding of these doctrines that shapes their whole approach.
I think some people probably have doctrines that influence the way they think and act without even like truly realizing it.
Absolutely.
Because there definitely are people who have had say things about, like, work is one, where they're like, you know, if I ever take a break, because, you know, Proverbs says, was it a little folding of the hands, a little laying of the head or something like that, and destruction comes quickly. So they're like, so if I ever take a vacation or I ever take a break, like I can't, and they end up working themselves ragged. And I'm like, wait, that's a theology. Like, you're believing something there about God and about how he wants us to work and live. And that is influencing how you live, even though it's just like a super minor thing. Like, is God okay with us resting more than just on the Sabbath? That's a pretty minor issue. I think we can disagree and go to the same church and be good friends and brothers in Christ, but that does affect how you live in the day to day.
And that kind of brings up a good point to me, and that's like, people can have bad doctrines with really good motivations. Right? Yeah. Like, someone's trying to be God honoring, they just understand something that maybe you think is incorrect. And I think part of the reason we're trying to think through how important these are is that will shape how we approach someone. If this is a matter of salvation, there's kind of an urgency and a firmness we need there. Whereas if these are just minor issues that are negatively impacting someone's life, then we can approach them gentler.
Yeah. But anyways, we've said primary, secondary, tertiary a couple times, but I think it's worth really defining what we mean before we get too deep into this. So primary issues are what we call those issues that really define the faith. This is what makes a Christian a Christian. It's the essentials, usually essentials of the gospel, like the sinfulness of man, the fact that we have all sinned, and our inability to save ourselves, and with that our salvation is through faith. Those are pretty foundational core things that's what primary doctrines are. Who God is, like you know, if you're saying God isn't all-knowing, all-powerful, unchanging, sustaining, like, that you're probably believing in a different God, so we're not part of the same religion then. Whereas secondary issues, that's where, again, we can disagree. It's not the core of the gospel, but we're going to end up at different churches. So, like, you know, church polity, how is the church governed? Baptisms, when we mentioned already, philosophy of worship. You added in the notes complementarian egalitarianism, which is what SBC was deciding. Is this is this something we have to divide over, or can we agree, and we'll come back to this in a little more detail. But you said Calvinism and Arminianism, which is an interesting one, because I think it depends if you're a leader or an attender in a church, if you have to go to a different church based on where you land on that. But again, we'll come back to that. Basically, secondary issues are things that we can disagree with, but we're still brothers.
So kind of another way to say it would be like primary issues are like if you even believe the gospel, if you're saved. Second one is how do you believe that? What about it?
Yeah, more specifics of the gospel.
Yeah.
And then tertiary means thirdary, which is funny because that's not a theology word. It's an English word, but you just never hear it. Like, I don't think I've ever heard someone use the word tertiary outside of like church and theology, but that's issues that not that they're not important, because as we just said, like all of this is important, but it's things that we can go to the same church, we can get along. It's not going to create much division. And these are probably these are the ones that most people say it's not worth arguing over, but it's the ones that I have the most fun arguing over, because at the end of the day, we're still brothers, we're still gonna go to church and stuff. But it's things like what it potentially Calvinism or Arminianism could fit into that realm if but you mentioned Age of the Earth.
Yeah, right. I find like what are the two parts of the Bible that Christians disagree most with? The very beginning and the very end.
Yeah, creation and eschatology.
Exactly.
Ones that it's really fun to disagree and have those conversations on. You said liturgy in the notes too, which is interesting. But yeah, like it's fun because I showed up at your church randomly just this last Sunday, and we did communion, and I was like, hey, is this hold it and take it together communion, or is this take it immediately communion? Because I feel like every church I go to is either people walk up and they just take it, or like we all sit there and we hold it until until the pastor says, "This is my body broken for you." Like, it's funny as a guest, like always kind of like watching, is like, is anyone else eating their bread yet?
Yeah, you don't want to be that one person and everyone just staring at you,
which kind of distracts from like the point of communion. So it's a little unfortunate when that happens, but
that illustrates the point, right? It's not unimportant. Communion's a pretty sacred thing, and it's like it's you have doctrines that are the reason for it. It's a theological issue, but it's not like no one's going to say you're not saved because you took it too soon. Yeah.
One in secondary and tertiary is probably the area where the lines blur the most.
Yeah,
like some people try to make secondary issues tertiary when they really should be secondary, and some people try to vice versa make tertiary issues something worth dividing over when they maybe shouldn't be, and some people try to make tertiary issues really primary, and that's tends to be the people like, I don't know if you've had the experience of being called divisive for trying to make primary issues primary and secondary in a church, but I find the people who are trying to make tertiary third issues primary are the ones who are really causing division. Those are the ones who actually need to be like sat down and been like, chill.
Our church had to do that right before we started coming. There was someone who was like campaigning essentially against the leaders of the church, saying this whatever issue, I think it was eschatology, is so super important. Yeah, and it was just causing division. But then obviously you can't have the other extreme where you just don't want to cause any division, so you don't define all these things.
But yeah, so having those terms established, let's just get into like the thick of it for a bit here. Like, what are primary issues? What are some non-negotiables of Christianity? What makes a Christian a Christian?
Well, I think the first and most obvious answer you should think of is you think Christian is Christ. So, I mean, if you don't believe there was a historical Jesus, that he died on the cross for your sins, rose from the dead, you're not really a Christian. Yeah. Whatever else you want to pick and pull from the religion.
Well, that Jesus was God. If you don't believe Jesus or is God, I should say. It's funny talking about the history of someone who still exists but isn't like visibly present. But yeah, Jesus is God. If you don't believe that, you're not a Christian. Which, by the way, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on YouTube, but Mormons don't believe that.
Which is funny because Mormons have kind of done a 180, like their older literature is like, we are the only saved church, everyone else is heretics. But if you meet a Mormon on the street today, they're much softer, and we're like, oh, we're all just Christians. But like, if we follow different Christs, and their Christ isn't God, then we're not, unfortunately.
Yeah, which is one of those things that if you just talk to the missionaries at your door, might never come up. But when you actually get into it, you realize that who they think Jesus was is very different from who we know Jesus is, based on his word.
Or you could even go, like, even in Islam, they like to acknowledge Jesus as a prophet.
Yeah.
So, like, right, like how you understand Christ is a huge piece of the dividing line. Which
makes me think of the point of so many people in North America are like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, I believe in God. But just believing God exists doesn't make you a Christian. It's who do you believe God is? Do you believe he's who he says he is in his word? And that's where I'd say I think factors like that he is all-knowing and all-powerful. Like I think open theism, which is kind of trendy, that's this idea that God isn't all-powerful, and it's an attempt to answer the like sovereignty debate. Like, does he control our things or does he not? And there's a little bit of mystery, and people who try too hard to explain away the mystery end up on this, well, maybe God isn't all powerful. And that to me, at least, I think is just straight up heresy.
Right. Like God's given us scripture, like it defends himself. We don't need to try and think of a way to get God off the chopping block.
I think if you disagree with things God says about himself, when he's like, I'm all powerful, I shape the earth and hold the stars, and like trying to think of exact, like he goes in Job is a really good, like God states his case passage. But there's a lot of times he says it to Israel through the prophets. But if God's like, I am all powerful, and you're like, no, you're not. It's like, who do you think you are? No.
But we don't realize that how often that you go reading those texts and you have these, we all do, the presumptions about what it means.
Yeah.
That sometimes that almost will make you go against what it seems to be saying. Like, Jesus died to save his sheep, but obviously he died to save everybody, so that must mean something different than what I think it's saying.
Yeah. No, for sure. Well, and then we had a way back, one of our like probably most controversial topics that Kyle and I talked about is definitive atonement or limited atonement, because it's like, if did Jesus die for all people? And a lot of people go, well, yeah, obviously. It's like, well, if he died for all people, then why would anyone be going to hell?
Right, but a consistent view of that leads you to universalism, which primary issue. You can't be a Christian universalist. I'm sorry.
Which is interesting, because I would think that the specifics of definitive and limited atonement are a secondary issue.
Yeah,
but they protect you from a primary issue. If you're a universalist, if you think absolutely everyone is just saved no matter what they do, you're not a Christian.
Right, and that's what we meant. Like that, some of these doctrines are really linked with other ones, so it might not be a fundamental in itself, but what it protects you from, or the implications of ignoring it, are far more serious than whatever apparent division we cause by being faithful to how we understand it. And I would rather see a church that's being faithful to the way they understand the Bible than ignoring or compromising on things for the pursuit of unity.
Well, and that's something that we've said a lot on the show, is like, even if you disagree with us, actually flesh out what you believe. Like, if you're an Arminian, just like have a consistent biblical reason for why. And maybe I don't think you can have a consistent biblical reason for why, but try, like, be in the Bible, flesh it out and defend it and know what you believe. Because this whole, I'm kind of neither, I don't really know, I'm just gonna float around, makes you really vulnerable to just dangerous ideas, or like open theism, trying to like implement a third way kind of thing.
And as Christians, honestly, we're supposed to know what it is we believe.
Yeah,
we're supposed to defend the doctrine and the truth, and like Peter says, like we're supposed to be able to give an answer when people ask, well, why do you believe that? You shouldn't just say, because that's my church's statement of faith.
Yeah, that was something that came up in the Timothy series, is that the faith is reasonable. And I think when I talked about Santa around Christmas too, I mentioned that we often treat it too much like Santa, which is something we believe, and it's like, yeah, we just believe it because we believe it, and it's like it's actually really logical and reasonable. And when you get into the realm of worldviews and cohesive worldviews, the only one that really fully has no gaps is a Christian worldview. That's the only worldview that can address like every area of life. But can you think of any other like primaries? I'm sure there's more.
Yeah, we're not being super comprehensive, but like anything, when we say primary, like you said, that's what makes you a Christian or not. This is like what's anything to do with salvation, anything to do with the core aspects of the gospel. What we're saved from, what we're saved to. So
Jesus is who God is. I guess salvation by faith. I don't know if we said it. We said it earlier, but because that's a big issue that you see. Like most of Paul's epistles are people being like, salvation by doing this, by not eating meats and doing these Jewish practices still. And he's like, no, faith. Like Galatians is probably the most obvious one I could think of for that, where it's just like it's very clear in scripture that we're not saved by doing certain practices. We're saved by trusting in the Christ who has done.
Right. And so that's why I would say like that's, yeah, maybe not a theological view of God or understanding, but it's part of the gospel, because it's what does a saved person look like? How do you know that you're saved?
Yeah,
for sure.
And that probably gets almost like some secondary, like what does a saved person look like? I feel like,
right. It's a big category. Exactly.
Yeah. What do you think of is like a typical secondary issue? Something that you would go, I'm not going to attend that church, but I still think they're good Christians. Like,
yeah, well, we mentioned we've mentioned a few already, right? Complementarianism versus egalitarianism, not a gospel issue, but that'll change that might determine who's a pastor, that might determine what families and teaching look like. It's very practical for everyday life. We talked about Calvinism and Arminianism, which that's how you understand the gospel. So it's not enough to make you saved or not. Yeah. But it is enough that's like, week in, week out, what the teaching looks like, how you approach prayer in your life is going to be really shaped by that. So that's kind of secondary issues. They have a big impact, but not a salvific one.
I think that it's funny that both of those examples are ones that I think people often try to say are tertiary, because like, can women be pastors in your church? You're like, it's not that big of a deal. Let's not fight over it. Let's not divide over it. That's Rick Warren's thing. There's denominations, don't divide over it. But you're making a practical decision. There are either women preaching in your church or there's not. So you're making a choice, and then you have to decide then when a woman steps on stage, are you going, this God is blessing this and this is biblically consistent, or you're going, okay, no, I don't think this is right. So you are having to, like, you're probably not going to go to a church that has a regular female preacher if you don't believe that women should be preaching. So exactly. It is a secondary, it is a dividing issue, even though we often, because it's such a hot button and we don't want to like debate it anymore, we're often like, it's tertiary, it's not that important. And same with Calvinism and Arminianism. And I think that one is because a lot of people don't understand it, that they try to make it less significant. But like your pastor, unless your pastor is just really not educated, probably has a stance. Like, or he's a Molinist, I guess.
Or an open theist.
No, or an open
hopefully
theist.
Not that.
And then, well, Molinism is a whole other thing. I think it's trying too hard to come up with a plausible answer that isn't actually born of scripture. It's just born of logical reasoning. It's like, yeah, very, very systematic external, but yeah, well, because again, it depends how you approach evangelism. And I think as a church body, you're going to be led in some ways by that. Like, do you believe God is in control, or do you believe he's not? Or even I think some of the response to that illness which shall not be named, which caused a global pandemic. Try not to flag anything on YouTube, but like, I think you saw a consistency with people who are like, God is in control. They're like, this is an unfortunate thing, it's scary, but we're not gonna let this drive us into hiding and cause us to fear. And then there's people who are like, oh man, God, where are you? How are you letting this happen? And then like you see whole communities that like kind of swayed one way or the other, and that's driven by what you believe about God's sovereignty.
Exactly. Like it. Yeah, right. It's like sovereignty is kind of an umbrella issue that will shape how you interact with all these other maybe less important things on their own. But like with people divide over things that shouldn't be divisive in their own.
Yeah.
And people try and ignore things that are more important than we should. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here, is think through why the R aren't important.
Yeah.
And like legalism, I would say, is a big one where people try and make less important things super important, super primary. Because, like, you know, whether or not you drink or something is not going to get you saved, but it could get you kicked out of some churches.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, and one I think is interesting too. I don't think we mentioned in a minute. So eschatology, how you believe about the end times, is one that can be tertiary or secondary, kind of depending on where you land.
And that's a big category too, right? Like, even within eschatology, we're like, we all need to agree Jesus is coming back at some point because the Bible's so clear about it.
I think
but
that's
the
primary.
Other specifics,
that Jesus is returning is primary issue. The order of things leading up to his returning, potentially tertiary, but then I think it's also affects how you function, because there are people bracing for the tribulation because they're expecting to go through it. There are people who believe the tribulation has happened, and there are people who believe they're going to be raptured before the tribulation. So that's going to affect how you live. And then you see churches that are very post-millennial in their leaning tend to be very confident and outspoken, especially in politics, because they expect to see fruit from that. So that is going to have some practical influence on the leaning of a church. But as you as an individual, if you're not leading in a church, you could probably disagree on that, and it might be a tertiary issue for you as a layperson sitting in a pew, but a secondary issue for a leader. You think
yeah, I think there's just a higher standard of unity. Like a church needs to be cohesive in what it's teaching. You can't have someone getting up the week after the last week and disagreeing with the sermon that the other guy just gave. But as an attender, you can have your own personal convictions. And looping back for a second to just the idea of these secondary issues, I think secondary issues are the hardest to talk about as Christians because they're still important and they have this big impact in our life. So we want to be able to address them, but without calling people heretics and dying over them. Yeah,
they're a little bit like touchier because you get people like, are you saying I'm a heretic? And it's like, no, I'm just saying you're wrong. It's like,
right.
Or even like, and I've seen people online especially who are like, oh, Baptists believe this or Calvinists believe this because they're heretics. And it's like, well, no, even if you wholeheartedly disagree, that's not heresy. That's a secondary issue. It's specifics. It's not the core matter at hand. But
right. So people just, sometimes you draw such narrow lines that anyone who disagrees with you on anything is wrong and dangerous. And that's why we want to have these lower important things that we can still have fellowship, still have unity, and disagree sometimes.
But I feel like we've kind of hit, but can you think of any other like tertiary issues? Or can you think of any that should be tertiary that people probably treat as secondary?
Definitely. The first thing that comes to mind is like your worship style. I think that's the first thing you notice when you go into a church. Do you only sing hymns? Do you only sing psalms? Do you have a drum set on stage? Like this is all just style choices. It's doesn't impact the gospel at all. But people can make them too important when they put everything on that.
I have like worship leader PTSD because I feel like no matter what you do, it's wrong for someone.
Yeah.
Or I like to tell this story of there's a time I did was it Just As I Am, I think, but I did like this kind of like rocked out version. It was really upbeat, and one person came up to me and they're like, man, you really, like, that was just disrespectful to that classical hymn that you would do it that way. And then that they walked away. I was like, oh, I'm sorry I felt that way. I thought it would bring new life. They walk away. Someone else comes up and is like, I hate that old hymn because it just makes me think of like old dusty churches and legalism. And I was like, oh, what? I was like, I've been attacked by both sides for doing the same song.
Right.
It was like, oh man.
Right. Sometimes it's hard to address tertiary issues because we have all this baggage and experience.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to just assess some of these things just biblically.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a chapter in, is it Corinthians or Romans, where Paul's talking about matters of conscience, and like, should we eat this or not eat this? Should we?
Yeah.
And then these are just personal issues. They're not fundamental.
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever attended a church where I've just really loved all the music all the time. Like.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, it's relative, and it's not. One of my favorite things about worship is that there's a story Francis Chan told of, like, after church, someone comes up and says, I didn't really get much out of the worship this week. And he says, it's okay. It's not for you.
Yeah. So, well, that came up with my conversations with Pastor Trev the last few weeks. Like, is the church for the members or for the community? And it's like, well, really, it's for God, first and foremost. Like, it is for the members and to an extent for the community, but it's really we're gathering. Our worship is to be pleasing to God. And I mean, then that's where you get into the discussion of normative versus regulative, and always get confused which is which. I feel like
they're trying to sound like the same thing, normal or regular, right?
Yeah, right. But one of them's like, God, it's only okay to worship God in the ways that he says he wants to be worshipped. And then there's other views like, you can worship God in any way except what he specifically says not to do. So like, is painting during a worship service a thing? And that's a thing for me where I'm like, I don't know if it is, but also if you want to paint during the worship service, I think that's a tertiary issue. I'm not going to leave a church because someone's painting during the music. Would you? I
used to go to a church, like, I come from a very charismatic Pentecostal background where that was literally happening. I've seen that. So now I would be uncomfortable with it, and it kind of tends to go with other attitudes, but no, it's not by itself a definitive issue by any means.
I definitely once in my Bible college days left a church over people randomly shouting things during music, and it wasn't like this wasn't like a that's wrong issue. It was like I don't like this.
It's just uncomfortable.
I was like, this is annoying to me and distracting, so I'm gonna not attend here. But
right, or like tertiary issues, like said, like I think in the intro we talked about liturgy.
Yeah,
it's like not just worship, but like I think expository preaching is a very important principle, but that's that's just how your church operates. Is it okay to be topical? Sure. Yeah. And should the sermon be 20 minutes or 40 minutes? That's relative.
Does your liturgy have a call to confession time? Because that's something that used to be extremely common, but now it's pretty much only like Reformed churches that do it.
Which again, theology, we don't want to make people feel uncomfortable, so let's reduce that.
But I think it's just to kind of wrap this up. If someone's listening and they're like, I haven't given much thought to these, like, do I need to start thinking about this? Like, where do we start in working out what we consider to be primary, secondary, tertiary?
Right. And I think the answer is, like, obviously everything we believed is based on scripture, but there's a lot in there. Like, there's probably a scripture for almost every issue you can think of. So I think one of the guidelines is that, God's word tends to be clearer about what's more important and talk about it more often than the obscure things. Like, the reason we understand eschatology so differently than being saved by Christ is because one is very clear and said again and again and again, and one's a little more murky. Like, we have to be honest that some of the things we believe, even if we think we understand them clearly, are not that clear to everybody, and that must mean there's more room for respecting disagreement.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. Like, if you think if there were 4 different accounts of Revelation, like if it wasn't just the revelation of John, but the revelation of Matthew and the revelation of Luke, like if we had those to like kind of cross compare, we probably would be able to come to a more like cohesive, agreed upon view of what the end times are going to entail. Whereas the gospel message and the essentials of salvation by faith are just absolutely hounded on by every apostle and every epistle and everything written.
Right? By faith alone, you have like from Abraham to the epistles, like
Yeah.
it's just the central theme because that's critical, that's primary.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, like, was the earth made in 7 literal days? That's talked about one time way back there because it's not that important.
That's another example. So that's something that I personally think is tertiary, but a lot of churches will really hold it as secondary and divide over it. But
Well, it's linked, right? Like the way you understand that in your hermeneutics, how you understand the Bible, is likely to relate to how you see a lot of other things too.
yeah, fair enough. But yeah, start with scripture. I think this is where having discussions is helpful because a lot of people don't want to talk about theology, but having a discussion and talking to other Christians and seeing what they believe and what they think is important can help you go, oh, I never considered the implications of this until I heard your perspective, or and that can help you kind of decide, like, is this more or less important than I thought it was?
Exactly.
And that's where, like, Christianity isn't an individualistic pursuit. Like Christ established the church. It's something that's meant to be done in community. And I'll even say reading books. I know a lot of people don't want to read theology, but reading, especially like old stuff, it's seeing what people in a different cultural context believed, because they're not necessarily, like, you don't want recency bias and you don't want anciency bias. Like, you don't want to believe everything old is good or everything new is good, but the things that you see are consistent throughout, like, early church and now, you could be like, okay, that's probably pretty solid. But then also seeing, like, okay, why do we think completely differently? Don't assume that we know better or that they knew better, but actually question those things and look into history. I love church history for that, because every generation has thought we're the ones that got it figured out. And then the next generation was like, no, we're the ones that got it figured out. And that's how you see a lot of progression in thought and theology. And you can see the train of certain threads and how things are developed. And even the phrase Trinity didn't exist for the first while of the church, but you could see how it came about. And that's where learning about our history and the early church fathers and those people is really helpful. But
right. And then I confess, as someone who's very underread and unfamiliar with church history, but you appreciate it because people much smarter than you have spent a lot longer than you thinking through these issues. And if you look back over 2,000 years and there's a consistent view, and one day you come up with open theism or something, like, if you think everyone before you is wrong, I'm sorry, but you're probably wrong.
Well, in most things, Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. Most things that people come up with today, and they're like, this new theology, wow. I'm like, no, that's Gnosticism. That was like the first heresy that came to be.
Well, and that kind of can be a draw too, is that we want this to feel like we're more spiritual or we think things more deeply, but there's also a level, like we talked about, scripture's plain about what matters. The gospel is simple.
Yeah.
There's a reason we can stand consistently throughout the ages on the same belief, is because the essentials are plain and we can understand them and defend them.
Fair enough. Well, I think this was a good chat. Hopefully this was helpful for people. If you think we missed something obvious, or you think we're crazy, or you just want to say yes and amen, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on YouTube, and that is really nice because it helps the video get more exposure. But if you're shy, you can also message the Instagram at Sinner Suffers. I couldn't use the word "and" on Instagram for some reason. At Sinner Suffers, and we have a Discord, which none of us have used in a minute, but we're in there. Matthew's in there too. We've disagreed on things in there before. You can join and we can have conversations, and then Brandon will come in and he's way smarter than all of us somehow, and I don't know why he doesn't have a podcast, but it's good times. Links for all that are on sinnersandsufferers.com. But yeah, thanks for being here. I'm hoping to have you back.
I hope so. That'd be a lot of fun.
All right, I'll see everyone else later.